What's up Laravel developers, it's Dari here and welcome to today's video where we're going to create a currency converter with Laravel 8 and we're going to deploy it using Cloudways. We're not going to create all the calculations for different currencies ourselves, but for that we can use a package with one simple command in the CLI, which we will pull in later on this project. As you can see on my screen right now, I've got my terminal open where I am located inside a folder called Workspace. Inside my workspace, I usually store all my projects. You don't need to have the same setup, just find a location where you want to save your project. CD into that location and start the video again. We're going to deploy our project using Github, and I haven't used Github in my channel before, but it's very simple to use if you follow along. I've already opened my Github in my browser, and I have clicked on New Repository. Let me zoom in, and let's give our repository a name. Let's say Laravel currency converter. Let's also add a description of Laravel currency converter deployed on Cloudways. Our repository is going to be private. It really doesn't matter for this course, both of them are fine. In order to create it, we need to click on create repository. So let's do that. Right now you can see that our repository has been created. You will see a URL right here, so let's copy it. Let's go back to the terminal because we need to clone our project. So in here, let's say git clone and let's paste the link that we just copied. This will create a new folder for us if we hit enter. If we then cd into the name that we just created, so Laravel currency converter. At the moment, we're in the master branch. What we need to do right now is to obviously create a new project inside our GitHub repository. You can create projects through Composer directly, but I like to create my new Laravel project as a global Composer dependency. So let's perform the Laravel, new Laravel. If we hit enter, our project will be created within 30 seconds. This will create a complete Laravel scaffolding for us. We don't need authentication in this course, or at least I won't be adding it since it's not necessary. You can add it if you want to extend the project. As you can see, our project has been created, but the issue is that if we write down ls, we have created a folder called Laravel inside our GitHub folder, which is kind of overkill. So let's move back all files that we have inside the Laravel folder, one directory, by doing mv space Laravel / space dot. If we hit enter, all files from the Laravel folder have been placed back one directory inside the main directory that we got. If we write down ls right now, you can see a Laravel scaffolding. We're ready to push our project into GitHub, so let's do that. Let's first say git add dot, which will add all files that we have created. This might take a second. Then we need to create a commit to stage all files. So let's say git commit -m space Laravel scaffolding. Let's hit enter. And the last command is a git push to push it to our GitHub repository. So let's say git push. If we navigate back to the browser and refresh our GitHub, you can see that our Laravel scaffolding project has been added 21 seconds ago. Today's video is brought to you by Cloudways, a managed hosting platform for your applications. Cloudways has enabled businesses to scale and reach new milestones instead of worrying about server hassles. With reliable 24/7 support, Cloudways offers complete peace of mind from server-level nightmares. Furthermore, its superior tools and works enhance your productivity so you can focus on creating incredible experiences with your applications. It's a fast managed solution for agencies, SMBs and e-commerce businesses. What I personally like about Cloudways is their slogan, moving dreams forward. What I usually like to do is to show my Laravel and Node versions before I start working on the code, since there might be a case that you watch this video in a couple months or even years and something goes wrong with the versions. So let's navigate back to iterm. Let's write down php space -v. As you can see, our PHP version is 8.0. Now for our Laravel version, let's perform a php artisan space -- version. At the moment of this recording, you'll see that my Laravel framework is 8.48. There isn't a huge difference between the framework versions above 8. If you're using 8.2, it will most likely work exactly the same in 99.9% of the case. We're also going to use Node, so let's also check the version number of our Node.js. So let's perform a node space -v. And you can see that our node version is 14.15. We're ready to start our project right now. So let's perform a PHP artisan serve so we could open it in the browser. Let's copy our localhost and let's navigate back to the browser and let's open a new tab actually. If we hit enter right now, you will see a 500 error. And that's because the .env file does not work with the mv command that we performed. Let's open the folder, and if we navigate to the Laravel folder, let me actually zoom in. Alright. You'll see that we have a couple files right here which starts with a dot that can't be placed back one directory. So let's do it ourselves. Let's open the Laravel folder directory. Let's click on all files, and let's move it back one directory. If we navigate back to the browser and refresh it, you will see our Laravel project. Let's also open the project in Visual Studio Code. So let's open it. Alright, I already have it open apparently. What I usually like to do is to define my routes first before I start working on a project. And in our case, we're going to use a controller rather than passing in a view from the route, even though we're only going to use one page. I don't want to use the external terminal, but let's open the integrated terminal inside Visual Studio Code. So if we open the top navigation, click on terminal and new terminal. The reason why is because we're not going to use the terminal that much anymore, and I don't want to navigate in between screens to perform simple commands. Let's actually use our terminal right away since we're going to create our first controller, which will be done with the PHP artisan make me a controller called currency controller. The goal behind this project is to have our / endpoint as our main project, and then call another method which will then do the calculation, but it will return the same page with values from the controller. If we open our routes folder, you can see the web.php file. Let's open it. By default, you see that Laravel comes with one route we don't want to use. So let's remove it and let's define our own one. So let's say route : get. Inside the get method, we're going to pass in two parameters. The first one will be in single quotes /, which will be our first endpoint, comma. And we're going to pass in a second parameter, which will be an array. So let's add brackets. Inside the brackets, we're going to pass in the name of our controller, which is currency controller. As you can see in the dropdown, the controller name will appear, so let's click on it. And if we scroll up, you can see that the use statement has been imported as well of the currency controller. This is necessary since the route needs to know where currency controller comes from. Otherwise, we'll be getting an error message that the controller isn't defined. After the currency controller, we need to add a double semicolon, followed with the keyword class, comma, space, single quotes. Then we need to call the method that we want to use. I know that we haven't defined any methods inside the controller yet, but we will do it in a couple seconds. The name of our method will be index. If we save it and open the app folder in our Laravel directory, http controllers, you will find the currency controller that we created through Artisan. So let's open it. Let's remove the comment that we have and let's create a new function right here called public function index. Now let me zoom in. All right. We're not going to pass in parameters, but we're just going to return a view called index. If we save it, we'll need to define our view as well. So let's open the resources folder, the views folder, and you'll see a welcome.blade.php file. Let's actually delete it because we don't need it anymore. Let's create a new file inside our views folder called index.blade.php. If we write down test right here, save it, navigate back to the browser, refresh the page, you can see that test is being printed out and we have set it up in the right way. We have reached the next chapter of this course, and that's to set up Tailwind so we can design a pretty cool converter. Even though designing is not necessary in Laravel applications or Laravel tutorials, I do really like to have a good design since it gives me a satisfying feeling. I've also just created a Tailwind course, so we won't be going over the basics of Tailwind, but if you do want to learn it, I will link it in the description down below. I want to start off by creating the front end of our application without Laravel snippets, and replace it later with Laravel code when we pull in data from our package. The reason why I showed you my Node version is because we're going to install Tailwind through npm. So if we navigate back to Visual Studio Code and go to the terminal, let's perform npm install -D. We're going to pull in Tailwind CSS, and then we're going to say that we want the latest version by saying add latest. We're also going to add post CSS. So let's say post CSS add latest as well. And also the auto prefixer. So auto prefixer add latest. This will create a webpack file inside the root of our directory, which we will cover in a second, but let's also generate the Tailwind configuration file whenever this is done. To do that, we need to perform npx Tailwind CSS init. This isn't necessary to have, but I always like to have it as a backup since I might change up some values from Tailwind. What we need to do next is adding the 3 style sheets from Tailwind inside our app.css file inside the resources folder. So let's open it right here. Let's say add import Tailwind CSS /base. This will look inside the vendor directory and it will search for a folder called Tailwind CSS. And in there, a file called base.css is located. We're going to import it and then we're going to compile it. Let's duplicate this line of code twice. Let's change the second one to Tailwind CSS /components. And the last one is utilities. If we save it and close off the file, scroll down in the root of our directory and open webpack.mix.js, we need to change up some things right here. We need to tell Mix that we want to compile the file where we just added our 3 style sheets into our public folder, where our style sheet with Tailwind utility classes will be added. So let's remove this piece of code and let's recreate it. We're going to tell Mix to call a function called JS, and inside the parentheses, we're going to compile our resources /js /app.js. It might not be useful to do the app.js as well, but if you're working on a project with JavaScript or you're thinking about extending this project, it's good to have it. Let's add a comma because we need to define the location where we want to compile it to. And in our case, we want to compile it to public /js. A file called app.js will be generated inside the public /js folder. The next step is to compile our Tailwind CSS through post CSS. So let's go outside of our parentheses and hit enter. Let's add a tab and say .postCSS, which is a function. We're going to pass in the resources /css /app.css. And we're going to compile it, so comma, to public /css. Then outside of the single quote, we're going to add a comma, space, set of brackets, and hit enter. And inside the brackets, let's require, which is a function, Tailwind CSS. I've got a typo right here, excuse me. This needs to be compiled, and in order to do that, we need to perform npm run dev inside the CLI. Let's hit enter. Like I just showed you, this will compile the app.css file inside the resources directory into the public folder. If we go to our public directory, right here, open the CSS folder and the app.css file, you can see that we have a pretty big CSS file. If we press Command F or Control F and search for Tailwind, you can see that our Tailwind custom styles have been set. The next chapter of this course will be designing our interface. Luckily, we only need to have one interface, which will be our index file, so it will save us a lot of time. Even though we're going to use one page, I still like to split my views into multiple files. Let's create a new folder inside our views folder called layouts. And inside the layouts folder, let's create a new file called app.blade.php. I prefer to use this in case you or me will ever continue on with this project. If we open the app.blade.php file, we're going to start off by adding our HTML document. So let's write down doc and hit tab. This has just been done with Emmet, so make sure you have Emmet installed. What we then can do is to go inside the body tags and we could define a yield. So let's say add yield, which needs to have a name, and let's give it a name of content. If we then navigate back to our index.blade.php file, remove test, we need to say that we want to extend, so add extend, the layouts.app file. So we're going to pull in our HTML structure. What we're then going to do is right below our extend is to say, well, create me a new section with the name of content. Everything that comes right below content, and we need to add the closing section as well, and section. So everything that comes in here will be placed inside the yield, so inside the body tags. Before we can add our Tailwind utility classes, we obviously need to make sure that it's inside the app file. So let's open the app.blade.php file, and right below our title, create a link, and the href will be Laravel snippets, and we're going to call the mix function. This will look inside the public folder, and we're going to say that we want to search for a folder called CSS and a file called app.css. In order to test this out, we could add some classes to our body. So let's give our body a class. Let's set the background color to bg-gray-200. Let's set the height to screen. Let's add a leading -none. And let's define a new font of font-sans. Before we test it out, I want to use font awesomes and I want to use it through CDN. Just follow along, create a new one, and the href will be //use.fontawesome.com/v5.0.7/css/all.css. If we save it and save our index page as well, navigate back to the browser, refresh the page, you'll see that the background color did indeed change to gray. And that's good because it's the only thing that we have changed. But it's always good to make sure that your Tailwind is set up before you start adding classes. So right now we're ready to focus on the header of our section. So let's navigate to Visual Studio Code and let's open the index.blade. Right inside of the section, create a div. Let's give it a class of min-width-screen. I will go over the design pretty quick because it is not what this video is all about. Let's add a min-height-screen. Set the background equal to gray-100. Let's make it a flex and a flex-cool. Let's center the items, so items-center and justify center. Let's create a new div inside our parent element. Let's give it a class of width-5/6. Let's set the LG colon width-4/6. Rounded XL. The background is gradient to B and the shadow is XL. Let's create another div with a class of text-white. PY is 4. The BG is gray-200. And the last div in here will have a text of text-center. Let's set the font equal to bold and let's set the text equal to 2XL and the text is blue-600. In here, let's create an H2 where we add the text of convert, and right in front of convert, let's create a I class with a class of fab space fa-gg. If we save it and navigate back to the browser, refresh it, you can see a header of our application. Let me zoom out actually. Alright, we're ready to create the input fields and send the button where we want to perform the request. So let's navigate back to Visual Studio Code. Below the first closing div inside our element, let's hit a double enter since we're going to create a form right here. We have an action because we need to do a request to the controller, which will be /convert. We also need to define the method, and at this moment we're not going to update, delete or edit something, but we're simply going to perform a post method. So let's set the method equal to post, since we want to convert one value to another value inside the controller, and we want to return the value back to our page. Below our form, let's add an add CSRF token, which is a cross-site request forgery token, which is required with a post. Right now, we're ready to add our input fields and a submit button so we can perform the request. Right below our CSRF, let's hit a double enter. Let's create a div. Give it a class of px-4 and the py is 12 and set the text to white. Then we have another div, which is a class with flex items-center and let's set justify between and the margin bottom is 5. Then we have the last div, which has a class of flex and flex-cool The font is bold, the width is -2/6, and the px is 2. In here we're going to create a label first. It's for the amount. Let's also add a class of margin bottom is 3 and the text is black. Inside the label, let's add a text of amount. Below our label, we have an input field. The type is equal to text, and let's actually align this so it's easier to read. Below our type, we have a name, which is amount, which we will grab inside the controller. Let's add a placeholder of 1.00. And let's give it a class of py is 3, the px is 5. The borders are rounded and the focus is outline -none. The text is gray-600. On focus, I want to set the text to gray-600. And we have a border and a border -4. If we save it and navigate back to the browser, refresh it, you'll see our first input field where we can add an amount. But the amount needs to be from a currency to another. So we need to create 2 input fields for that as well. So let's go to Visual Studio Code and right below our first closing div, let's create a new div. Give it a class of flex-cool. The font is bold and the width is 4/6 and the px is 2. Inside the div, we can copy our label and paste it in here. Let's change the name to from, and the amount is from as well. We're going to create a select rather than a input because we want a user to be able to select through a list. So let's create a select because we're going to select a value from a drop-down list of our currencies. We're going to add one placeholder currency, but later on we will be adding it from our package. We don't need the ID. Let's actually remove it. Let's align it on the line below. And well, we need more than a name because we have a class as well, which is actually the class that we have right here. So let's copy it, paste it in here. All right. And on the line below, we need to add a name as well because we're going to say that it's from. Inside our select, let's create an option. We don't need the value yet, but we do need the class of py-1. Inside the option, let's pass the value of EUR, of euro. Let's actually duplicate the entire div because we need a 2 as well. So the label for is 2. The text is 2 as well with a capital. Our select has our right except for the name, which is 2. And we're going to convert euro to USD. If we save it and navigate back to the browser, refresh it, you can see that we got 2 new drop-down buttons right here, with 1 option actually, but we still can't submit it. So let's create the submit button as well. Right below our first closing div, let's create a new div with a class of float to the right, and the text is right. Inside the div, let's create a button. The button has a type of submit. And let's add a class of bg-blue-600. Let's add a border. The font is bold, the margin top is 6, py is 4, and the px is 5. It's rounded -XL, and let's add a transition of all. We're also going to apply a hover. So let's say hover colon bg-blue-500, and the text is convert. If we save it and go to our currency controller, let's create a new method right here below our index method called public function convert. We're not going to do anything in here except a dd of test. We will do the logic in a second, but we obviously need to define our form first and see if everything works fine. Save it, navigate back to the browser, refresh it, click on the convert button, and as you can see, we have a 404. Think about it for a second and see why. We obviously need to define the route for our /convert endpoint as well. So let's navigate back to Visual Studio Code and let's open the web.php file. Right below our route to the / endpoint, let's create a new route, colon. But this time we're not going to perform a GET request, but we're going to perform a POST request. The endpoint will be /convert, we're going to pass in the controller, so currency controller, class, comma, and the method is convert. If we save it, navigate back to Visual Studio Code and return one page, refresh it, pass in an amount and click on convert, you'll see that the form has sent us to the currency controller and it's calling the convert method where we placed the die dump of test. In the next chapter of this tutorial, we're going to pull in a Laravel package which will pull in the exchange rates. You can also do this with the crypto exchanges, but that's not something we'll do in this video. If we open a new tab in the browser and navigate to github.com/amrshawyy/Laravel-currency. You'll see the package that we're going to use in this tutorial. I've tried it before and it's very simple to use. The only thing you need to do is to chain methods that the package provides for us. So let's start off by pulling it in. In the installation section right here, you'll find a composer command that we can perform inside the CLI. So let's copy it. Let's navigate back to Visual Studio Code and let's paste it in the CLI and hit enter. Our package has been pulled in, but before we actually do something with it, let's see what we have pulled in. Whenever you pull in a package, it will be stored inside the vendor directory. You'll see that the first folder here is armshawy, if I'm pronouncing it right, which is the package that we just pulled in. So let's open it. I'm actually glad that it starts with an A, otherwise we have to search through the entire list, but that doesn't matter. If we open the currency folder, you can find a source folder. You'll see a couple files that have methods that we could use. I'm not going to cover them all, but I'll cover the most basic one, which is the currency conversion. If we scroll down to the methods that we have, well, we have a constructor, but the most important one is the from method right here, which will accept a currency, and the to method as well. So the from and the to currency. We have a method called round, which accepts an integer, and by the looks of it, this will round the integer that we're placing with an amount of x decimals. We also got an amount method, and this will be the input field that we have inside our view, which is the amount. So let's use this inside our controller. Let's close off this file, and let's actually close off a lot of files. We don't need the app page, we don't need the webpack, we don't need our route anymore, but we do need our controller and index page. If we navigate to the browser, you can see the usages right inside the GitHub repository as well. First, we need to pull in the use statement that we need. That's defined right here. So let's copy it, navigate back to Visual Studio Code, and place it right above our class. Then if we navigate back, we can copy this piece of code right here. Navigate back to Visual Studio Code. Let's remove the DD that we got. In order to test this out, let's set it equal to a variable called currency. Alright, let me align it. Then right below our variable currency, let's DD currency. What this will do is basically call a class called currency. It's going to convert a value from to an amount, and then it's going to get the result. So let's test it out. Let's navigate back to Brave. Let's remove our /convert endpoint. We haven't defined the amount yet, so let's click on convert. And you'll see that $1 is equal to 0.83 or 84 if you round it up, euros. By default, this package converts the value of 1. So $1 is equal to 0.84 euros. Like I've showed you before, we have the ability to convert more than $1 to an euro, but we need to chain an extra method to it. Let's navigate back to Visual Studio Code. Right after the to method, let's chain another method called amount. And let's pass in the amount of 100. If we save it and navigate back to the browser, refresh it, let me zoom in, you'll see that $100 is equal to 83.9 euros. If we go back to our / endpoint, and let me actually zoom out. Alright, you know that we added 2 select input fields with options. You don't want to add your options statically, what we just did right now, but it would be way easier to add it from the API. This will also prevent a lot of typos and currencies that are not available through the API. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Right below our currency, let's say that we want a new variable called codes. Let's set it equal to the currency, call it rates, and we want to get the latest rates. But then we need to change the get method as well. If we replace currency with codes inside the DD, save it, navigate back to Brave, refresh the page, click on convert, you can see an entire array list with keys and values. We do need the keys and we don't actually need the values, since the values are the currency rates and we only need the currency names. We're also doing one thing wrong, since we need to pass this line of code that we have right here inside the index method and not the convert method. So let's copy it. Let's actually remove the line of code. Inside our return view, after the single quotes index, let's add a comma, space, brackets, hit enter. Let's pass an array with the name of codes and let's set it equal to what we just copied. And we don't need the semicolon. Save it. And like I just said, this will be an array. So we need to loop over it inside the view. So let's go to our index.blade and let's start with the from. Let's copy our option because we need to add a for each loop. We want to loop as codes as one single code. But since we want to have the keys, we need to add an access operator and let's say variable value. In this case, code will have all the keys and value will be the currency value. Inside the loop, let's just paste what we just copied and let's align it. Let's remove euro and we're going to print out variable code. Save it, navigate back to the browser. Let's go to the / endpoint again. We have a new option right here in the from, which is AED. And if we click on it, you'll see an entire list of currencies that we can use. In some situations, you don't want the first value out of the list to be AED, but let's say euros, since it might be the most used currency in your area. For that, we could add a ternary operator inside our option. So, right after the class, let's add curly braces, and we're going to say that if the key is equal to EUR, so it's going to loop over all keys, and whenever it finds the euro, let's say that question mark, in single quotes, selected. So make euro the selected option. If it's not euro, just keep it empty. If we save it and navigate back to the browser, refresh the list, we made a mistake right here. Because we don't have key, excuse me, it's code. Save it, go back, refresh it, and you'll see that our default value is euro, and we still have our entire list of options. Let's navigate back to Visual Studio Code. Let's copy the entire loop. Let's go down to the option for the to. Replace it, but instead of saying that if code is equal to euro, let's set it equal to USD. Save it, navigate back to the browser, refresh it, and you'll see that we have euro and USD defined right here. Right now, we are ready to hop to the convert method to work on the logic of our applications. So let's do that. Let's go back to the currency controller. Let's go down. Let's remove the DD that we got. And we also need to pass the request since we're working with a form. So let's say request variable request. Then inside the method, we could basically say that, well, grab me the request and validate it first. Let's pass in an array in here. And inside the array, let's set the amount to numeric, so it needs to be a number, pipe, and the minimum is 0, comma, we have the from, which just needs to be required, and the to as well, so the to needs to be required. Now that we have validated all our inputs, it's time to convert it based on the input value. So let's replace currency with converted, so converted is equal to currency : convert, from, not USD, which is static, but from the request from. Let's do the same thing for the to, from the request to, and the same thing for the amount. So grab that from the request amount. Then I also want to chain an optional method, which will be called round. So let's say round. And this will round the number based on the integer that we're passing in as a param. So in our case, let's say that we want an amount with 2 decimals. I think that we got everything set up right now. The only thing that's left is passing in our converted variable back to the view. We're not going to return back an entire view like we did right here, but instead we're going to return the back method. So let's do that. Let's say that we want to return the back method, And this is a pretty cool method because it will allow you to redirect a user to the previous web page. Then we're going to chain another method which is called with. And inside the with method, let's pass in an array. So in here, we're going to pass in the conversion, which will be a sentence of request amount. And let's concatenate a space from the request from. And let's concatenate another string is equal to. Now the value that we want to show is converted. Concatenate one more time with a space and let's say request to. What this will do is place our conversion inside a session that we then can use inside the view. So let's do that. Let's save it. Let's go back to our index.blade.php. Right above our last closing div, let's create an add if statement where we want to check if the session conversion has been set. If it has been set, create a div. Give it a class of text-grade-500. Text is center and the padding top is 12. Change the font to bold and the text to 5XL. The width is 80% and the margin X is auto. If the session with the conversion string that we're passing in right here has been set, then go back to the index and print out that specific session. If we save it and navigate back to the browser, refresh the page. Let's say that we want to convert an amount of 10 from euro to USD and something is going wrong right here. Because I think that it should be inside our view. And let's go to our input fields. The name is amount, that's alright. Well, to debug it, let's actually do it together. Inside our function, let's say that we want to dd the request. Save it. Go back to Brave. Let's convert an amount of 10. Click on convert. The DD has been printed out. Let's open the request and we have an array or a parameters array, which has a token, amount and select. So this is something that's not right. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Inside the view, we have two names right here. So we can remove this one. The name is from. And let's double check this one as well because we copy pasted it and we have the same issue. Save it. Let's go back to Brave. Let's go and test it out one more time. Convert it. If we open the request again, we have a amount and a from and a to. So let's go back and let's remove our DD. That's a simple typo that just can happen when you are a programmer. Let's go back to the / endpoint. Let's convert 10. And as you could see, 10 euro is equal to 11.92 US dollars. Has been printed out. But we need a space right here. Right here. All right. Now let's test it out with two other currencies. So let's say that we want to convert 50. I'll just choose a random one. Cup to this one right here. Convert it. And 50 cup is equal to 43.71 ZMW. I have no idea what these two currencies are, but let me know in the description down below what it is or if you have ever used it. We're going to optimize our currency converter in this section. Like you just saw, when we submit our form, these input fields are resetting, right? Let's test it out. 50 euro to USD, or let's say UAH, convert. And this works fine, but the amount is gone and the to has been resetted to USD, which can be quite annoying. So let's think about it for a second. If we're able to do something with the amount, from and to inside the controller, we're also able to pass them back to a view. So let's go back to our controller, right here. We're returning back a string, and let's add a comma. On the line below, we're going to pass in the amount, which we're going to grab back from the request amount. Then we have the from, which we're grabbing from the request from. And then to, which is from the request to. Then if we save it and navigate back to our index.plate, we need to change up our loop or our option, because inside our ternary operator, we're going to check two conditions. We're going to see a variable code is equal to the add session from pipes, so or, if this one is correct, or the second one. And let's do the same thing for the second one as well. So variable code up until the pipes, and let's paste it right in front of the code. All right. Now this can go either two ways. US dollars will be the default value, and if someone converts with a different currency, which we grab from the session, that will be then chosen as the selected value. Let's change the code session from to code session 2, because we're inside the 2 select right now. Now if we go up to our amount, so let's add a value of curly braces, add session, and we're going to check if the amount has been set. If we save it and navigate back to the browser, add an amount of 50, and let's add 2 random currencies, convert it, and as you can see, everything stays the same. The last thing that we need to add is an error message when someone enters the wrong data. Since we're working with a float input field, we need to make sure that an error message pops up whenever a user enters a string. So let's do that. Let's replace 50 with code with Dari, convert it. We're not getting an error message right now, which might be a problem. If we navigate back to Visual Studio Code and scroll to the bottom, and right after our if statement, well above our end if, add an else if statement, where we're going to see if variable errors has any. Below our else if, we're going to add an for each loop, and we're going to loop over errors all as one error. If there are errors, let's print out a div with a class of text-red-500. The text is center, pt12, font is bold, text is 5XL, width is -4/5, mx is auto. And inside the div, we're going to print out variable error. Save it, navigate back to Brave, refresh it, and let's change the amount to code with Dari, convert it, and we're getting an error message that the amount must be a number. Right now, we're ready to deploy our project through Cloudways, and before we can do that, we need to commit all files that we added or changed. So let's navigate back to Visual Studio Code. Inside the terminal, let's perform a git add dot, so let's add all files. Then we have a git commit -m space added currency converter. And the last command that we need to perform is the git push. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, we're going to use Cloudways as our hosting platform. Cloudways is a web hosting service that in my opinion is pretty outstanding. You can choose between 5 different platforms to host your project. You can deploy it through DigitalOcean, Linode, Vultr, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud. And a cool thing about Cloudways is that you don't need to manage any of these platforms. It will do it for you, which makes it even easier. If we navigate back to the browser and open a new tab and go to cloudways.com, you'll see a Get Started for Free button on the landing screen right here. You don't need to enter any credit card credentials to get started with Cloudways, since you get a 30 days trial. If you do think about getting a Cloudways account, you can use my discount code. You'll get $15 off, which is Dari15. So what I want you to do is to create an account, and I'll see you back on the login screen. The first thing that you need to do when you set up your Cloudways account is to set up a server. Inside the top menu, let's click on Servers. Let's click on Launch since we need to create one. Under the application and server detail, you can choose your desired project. You can choose between WordPress, WooCommerce, PHP, Laravel, and Magento. In our case, we're going to work with Laravel since the entire video is dedicated on it. So let's click on it. Right here, we need to add some extra information. So the name of our managed app will be Laravel Currency Converter. The name of our managed server will be Cloudways Laravel App. The default hosting platform is DigitalOcean. And also make sure that you select the project, go in the Projects tab, create a project, and select your project right here. The default hosting platform is DigitalOcean, but let's keep it like that. If you think about changing it up, it's up to you. It works in the same exact way. The server size is actually quite important since you can scale it based on what you need for your project. The server size comes with a cost, but not if you're on a trial. And let's say that you want to set up a server size of 1 GB. You'll see that the price is only $10. You have a monthly price of $10 US, but you could also pay per hour, which will be equal to 0.0139 cents. This means that if you use my discount code, you can host your project for 1.5 months for free. Since our project is not quite big, we can just stick with 1 GB. But if we scroll down, we have the droplet, or better to say the location where you want to host your project. I'm living in the Netherlands, so let's see if that's even an option. And yep, we have Amsterdam right here. If we launch our project, you can see that it will take around 7 minutes before our server is ready to go. So pause the video and I'll see you back when it's done. If the process spinning thingy on the right here is done, it means that your server has been set up. So let's click on it. This will redirect us to the server management where we can find our master credentials right here. With these credentials, we can log into our hosting platform through the CLI. This can be done through SFTP or SSH, but since we deployed our Laravel project through Git, let's use SSH. Let's copy the username that we have right here. Let's navigate to the CLI. Let's open a new tab and let's zoom in. Write down SSH, space, paste our username, add an @sign, go back to Brave, copy your public IP, paste it right after our username, hit enter. It's going to ask to use a fingerprint, so let's say yes. Then it's asking for the password, so let's go to the password and copy it. Paste it right there. It's not showing the password, but the password is actually printed out right here. Let's hit enter, and our directory has been changed to the username that we have. If we write down ls to see the files that we have inside our master, you'll see one folder called applications. If we then cd into applications, perform our ls again, you'll find a folder with a random generated name. And I'm not completely sure, but I think that this will change every single time you create a new server. You can also change the directory name, but changing it won't make anything better. There is a chance that you even make it worse, so let's not even do that. We cd into the folder that we have, so HP, write down ls, and if you have launched a project through FTP or SFTP, you might be familiar with the folder structure that you're seeing right now. Since you always have a public underscore folder, this can be anything that you want, but in our case, it's our Laravel project. So let's cd into public underscore HTML. If we then perform an ls in here, you'll see a structure that you have seen before, which is a Laravel project. I usually perform a PHP artisan -- version in here to see if I'm correct or not. And this returns a message that our Laravel framework is using 8.26.1. This is not the project that we have created, but this is a default Laravel project that Cloudways added since we said that we want to create a Laravel server. Before we continue on with adding our own project right here, let's double check the PHP version numbers since there is a huge difference between 7.3, 7.4 and 8.0. If we navigate back to Brave and click on Settings and Packages in the left panel, click on Packages in the menu, you'll see that the PHP version is 7.3 right there. If we click on it, open the dropdown and choose 8, save it, we're getting a warning message, but it doesn't matter. Click on OK. If you're using 7.3, it's completely fine since the deployment will be the same. But I'm using PHP 8.0 like I showed you at the beginning of this tutorial, so I do need to change it up. This might take a while since our application needs to do an update, so pause the video and I'll see you back when this is done for me. Now that we have been over the basics of this, let's see the application that Cloudways added for us in the browser. And to do so, we need to click on the applications in the menu. Click on our project. Right here, you can find the application URL on a Cloudways server, applications credentials, and your MySQL access. In this video, we're not going to use MySQL, but if you do, you can easily set it up right here. What we want to do, and I think that I've already mentioned it twice right now, is to deploy our project through Git. So first, let's see the URL. This is the default Laravel project that they provided for us. Let's go back. And in order to deploy it via Git, we need to click right here on deployment via Git. So let's do that. What we need to do is to generate an SSH key, copy it and paste it inside our GitHub repository settings. So let's generate it first. Let's view the SSH. Let me copy it. So now we need to open our GitHub repository. Click on Settings. You'll find a menu item where you can deploy your keys right here. Then let's click on Add a deployment key. Let's give it a title of Cloudways Laravel currency converter key. And let's paste the key right here. Now we don't want to allow write access, so let's add the key. GitHub will ask us to confirm our account with a password, so let's add it. Confirm it. As you could see, our deployment key has been added to our repository. Let's click on Code inside our repo, since we need to copy the SSH link again. So let's do that. Let's click on Code, SSH, and let's copy it. If we then open our Cloudways tab again, you'll see that the deployment via Git section is asking for a Git remote address right here. So let's paste our Git address. Let's authenticate it so it checks if the deployment key that we added to our GitHub repository is correct. Now, there's a green icon right here, so that means that it is correct. If you're using a different deployment branch, you could change it right here. We only have a master, so let's keep it like it is. The deployment path is the public_HTML. Click on Start Deployment. This will replace all the files we had on our host that Cloudways added with the files that we got inside our repo. As you can see, our deployment was successful. So let's click on Access Details right here. Open the link again. And as you can see, we're getting an error message right here. And I can tell already what is going on right here. Now, whenever I see vendor and composer in an error message, a bell rings in my head. Because we always need to run composer install in the SSH to deploy a Laravel project. If we navigate back to iTerm and run composer install, it needs to be done inside the public_HTML. And right now you can see something that we are familiar with. Some packages are being pulled in. If we then navigate back to the browser, refresh it, you'll see our currency converter on Cloudways. And if we test it out, so let's add an amount of 10 from euro to USD. 10 euro is equal to 11.92 USD. This was it for this video. In my honest opinion, Cloudways makes it so much easier to deploy projects on hosting platforms. Even though the deployment part might take a while, we went over a lot of basics as well. This can be done in a couple minutes if you know what you need to do. Once again, if you are interested in using Cloudways, use my promo code DARI15 to get $15 discount. Let me know down below if you have used it and what your thoughts are on it. If you do like my content and you want to see more, leave this video a thumbs up, and if you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button.